Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Jake Kucheck tonight, that SF Giants guy. What we're going to do tonight, if you're new to the show, what we do here is break down the DFS main slate for college football. We're going to go game by game, giving you all the analysis you need to be competitive and get some of those green screens at the end of the day. We love those for sure. We're also going to talk about core plays at the end, any prize picks, underdog, or betting opportunities. At the very, very end, we're going to drop slate breakers, which is usually our version of a sneak play, and see how it does the following week. But before we get into that, let's recap and kind of just go over a couple of things from last week that we got right, because it was another pretty solid week overall. I will admit the secondary slates for last week didn't work out too well. FanDuel secondary slates remain soft, so that's something to be aware of. I know a lot of people don't play on FanDuel much anymore, but they are softer there on those slates. And the main slate ended up working out pretty well because we got a touchdown out of our guy, Lucas, for Arkansas. It's late in the game, but we still got it, 40-plus yards. Also hit on our guy, Super Mario, who's like 0.9%. He had a really nice game for Tulane. I think Tulane got robbed in that game against K-State. And then Caleb Johnson had just like the most amazing game ever. He's clearly the RB1 for Iowa now. Exciting stuff there. Just a good overall slate. Some good betting stuff that we hit on. Pittsburgh money line hitting the over 60.5 in NC State, Tennessee. One thing we did get wrong, me especially, was Grayson McCall's passing props and Nico's, but we did get 61 total points out of that game, which was just good enough to hit the over. Jake, how did you feel about last week and overall just the vibes of the season so far?
Yeah, man. I didn't have enough Caleb Johnson. I'll come right out and admit that. I'm glad we got that out of the way less than 3 minutes into the show. Iowa running backs were the play. Caleb Johnson chiefly among them. And good on you for sticking to that conviction. I went some other directions and it didn't work out as well for me. I also did not get my multi-catch, big yardage touchdown game out of Ashton Hawkins from Baylor that I was hoping for. We did have a more competitive Baylor team once Cam Rising broke his hand or whatever he did to his hand. It looks like now he's got to deal with like tetanus or something in that hand. Something weird's going on with Cam Rising. Yeah. Yeah, so didn't get the big, sub 3% owned receiver call that I was hoping for. 2 slates in a row, but we'll get back and get after it. And yeah, man, I was expecting North Carolina State to show up a little bit more than they did. Maybe Tennessee figured out how to play defense. Maybe that's what happened. Because I didn't think North Carolina State was like that bad of an offensive team. And, KC and Grayson, that was a combination and a pairing that I was going to look to quite a bit this season and still will. Maybe Tennessee just knows how to play defense a little bit. It's not really something that, we historically have thought about them. But, look at Cincinnati and Pitt. I mean, that game was it didn't go quite as I expected to either, but it was still more high scoring, especially on the Cincy side than you typically see from them. And so teams are adjusting and changing over the years, and we gotta stay with the times. We can't be stuck on our brand biases with regard to what teams are going to do. So yeah, interesting to see. And then on like the super late slate, how about Boise pushing Oregon and making that one competitive? That was interesting to see from a lot of aspects, and that was the only slate that I felt like I actually got most of the pieces right. The main slate, I missed some big pieces that were kind of necessary, and so that didn't do so well. And then the afternoon was just absolute bad, or I guess the night slate to most folks on the East Coast, the 7 p.m. kick. I was all about NC State in that one, and I did have Dylan Sampson as the run back for most of it, and so that part worked out. But having way too much NC State exposure was not a good feeling come dinner time on Saturday.
Yeah, the Vols defensively, they might be stepping up, and that's bad news for the rest of the SEC. And no worries, man. You nutted the Ty Felton week 1 call so hard that I had to like try to pull my weight around here with the Caleb Johnson call. So no worries. You're 1-1 there with Hawkins and Felton, and I'm confident that you're going to bring a very special piece this week and get back on the right track there. So we're going to get into it. If you're watching on Twitter, on the stream there, X, I guess, or on YouTube, please make sure that you like, share, comment, questions, concerns, anything at all to interact with us or help promote the show at all. Just those interactions are very, very valuable to us. We do appreciate it very much. We're going to dive in here, get into the slate, starting with we're going to kind of go in different orders here. But we'll start with the Memphis Florida State game, which is the first one on DraftKings. Florida State, a 7-point favorite, total of 53.5. A team limping in here, Florida State at 0-2. But I'm seeing a lot of people kind of overlook Memphis because offensively, this team is juicy, but they haven't really had to show it yet. And I've seen a lot of disrespect for Sam Hennigan and the passing game. And I think that Florida State could be on their way to 0-3 when Memphis actually has to wake up, which I think they will do this weekend. What say you about this particular matchup, my friend?
Yeah, started off with something exciting like talking about DJU at quarterback for Florida State. How about that? So it's an interesting matchup. Florida State, it's been not what you want in terms of the start to their season. It is their first home game. So we'll I guess still give them the benefit of the doubt that like it's been a weird season so far with regard to starting halfway across the world and coming back and getting some jet lag against a fully rested team. But like all the excuses are done. You now have a home game that you're coming off and you're well rested. And if you don't take Memphis to task, like you can't talk anymore. Florida State is no longer in the conversation, not just of the playoff, they're way out of that conversation, but the conversation of like relevancy as a college football power. And so I think they're going to be motivated. I think this will be a competitive game. I don't think we see them get blown out or have the outcome be determined in the fourth quarter like we've seen with their game so far. But I also don't think the defense is going to be what keeps them in the game, and they haven't shown up on defense at all. I think the offense is going to have to pull their weight a little bit, which would make this a really good spot for Memphis, who, like you said, they have not had to keep their foot on the gas. They've had 2 blowouts so far. And I do think that there are viable pieces on both sides of this one. I don't think that Memphis's run D is anything special. And I think that Florida State, if they're smart, will pound the running backs, Waddell Williams and Toafili as much as they possibly can. And these are guys that were against Georgia Tech in the opener. They were like 7-7 and 7-1 or something like that. Like these were much more expensive running backs in a equally, if not less advantageous matchup. And so I think there's definitely an opportunity on using running backs on both sides of this one. I'm not going to get the DJU. I'll tell you that. I'm probably not super excited about the Florida State passing game. We haven't seen them do anything because it's been DJU throwing him the ball, and he just looks lost right now. Maybe he puts it together. I tend to want to be, too early instead of too late, but this is an exception where I am going to need him to show me that he can get it done before committing a roster spot to him. There's not a lot in terms of good options to use anyway. I guess Malik Benson is the alpha in the room, if you want to call it that, but he's been nowhere near alpha-like in terms of production. So I'm not real excited about passing in pieces. I think just maybe Waddell Williams and Toafili from the Florida State side. Memphis side gets a little bit more interesting, and it kind of boils down to how it is that you think they're going to attack Florida State. They haven't had to pass a whole lot. We haven't seen a Seth Hennigan ceiling game just yet. I think it is very much possible that we see one in this spot where, they're not going to be up by 30 plus points at any point in the game, most likely. Although with Florida State this year, who knows, right? But I think this will be a more competitive game than that. And we will see, a competitive 4 quarters out of Seth Hennigan and company. At 8K, he's not a screaming value. Like, this isn't like a 6.5 Seth Hennigan where I would be, all over it lock button. But it's also not so expensive that I, wouldn't fit him in if the price was right in his roster construction. Mario Anderson, on the other hand, at 6'2", is extremely compelling. We've seen, Jamal Haynes is great. Kai Robichaud is on Boston College. It's not, a team that we typically think would run the ball down the throat of a Florida State type defense. And he had a lot of success. And Mario Anderson has had a good amount of volume and a tremendous amount of efficiency so far, and comes in at only 6'2". He's to me an extremely compelling play. And that's not to say that we can't use him with Hennigan. I think both phases of the Memphis offense are going to be viable. You probably do want a Florida State piece if you're going to do that. And I would have a little bit of trouble using a receiver. So then you're using multiple running back spots from this game, which is okay. If you think this game gets into like the high 50s or even the 60s at 53.5, you're chasing a little bit. You might really like the over if you think it's going to blow up in that manner. As far as Hennigan's pass catchers, Rock Taylor, Demir Blankenship, the two obvious ones, when choosing between those two, I'm probably going Rock Taylor more often than not. I think we get more explosiveness and just, more focus from Hennigan on Rock Taylor. I've seen them be, a pretty dynamic pairing for quite a long time. And we don't have, was he Prieskorn? We don't have the big tight end taking up a bunch of targets like we've had in years past with Memphis. So I think we're going to go. Probably my focus is going to be Anderson and Rock Taylor with sprinkles of Seth Hennigan, but not a massive commitment to Seth Hennigan as it stands while I'm building right now.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the underdog stuff because the drafts, the battle royale drafts have been pretty popular across the last week or two. Mario Anderson is like being universally ignored till like the 4th or 5th round in a 6th round draft, and of course it's not every game on the slate. And I feel like people they're having some short timers with Memphis, and the same thing with Hennigan. He threw for over 300 yards in 8 of his 13 games last year and 6 of the last 7. So this is a dude that can certainly get it cooking here if Florida State figures it out offensively and actually has a good game and forces Hennigan to have to throw more. He could easily end up optimal. I'm not saying he's a guarantee to by any means. And like you said, the price a little bit higher, but I just feel like the public is not respecting Memphis whatsoever. So whether it's a bet on Memphis +7 or taking Hennigan and Mario, but I'm inclined to agree Mario Anderson is a strong play there. Sutton Smith is hurt and out long term. It looks like for the year. Brandon Thomas, who's been on this team forever, he was supposed to be the guy. Now he gets like short yardage stuff. He's a vulture candidate. They do like the Desrezios kid who transferred in from, I believe, UMass. He's okay. But overall, yeah, I really like this Memphis side of this game. So not a lot of Florida State for me. Probably will keep my main team exposure to someone like Mario. All right, we're going to move on to Oklahoma State versus Tulsa. A total of 62.5. A lot of points here. Oklahoma State an 18.5-point favorite. Now, we know about Oklahoma State two things for sure. One, Ollie Gordon's going to get a lot of volume. Is he going to do a lot with that volume remains to be seen. And then on the other side, the rushing defense of Oklahoma State is atrocious. But I don't know that Tulsa is going to necessarily have the pieces for us to use to take advantage, especially when you're talking about Anthony Watkins being priced at 5.4, hasn't been getting it done on the ground. And then their kind of 1B BBB option, Lloyd Event, not very exciting either at 4.5. So those are the two things we're really going to be looking at on Oklahoma State slates. Before we really get into it, let's talk about Ollie Gordon. I know that he was universally owned in the first week in which he did very well for us. He was about 45%. And that's a lot on a 12-game slate, but that was 60% of lineups that were basically dead to rights. Now, last week, he was closer to 75% in single entry, which is just ridiculous when you're talking about a 12-game slate. And he underperformed. They did end up beating Arkansas there, but 17 carries, just 49 yards. He did score a touchdown, so he salvaged kind of, but it was obviously a situation where he wasn't optimal. You didn't need to have him. So hopefully that pushes people away because he is priced at 10K. It's a tremendous amount of salary. But the nice thing is we get through this slate, you're going to find that there is a lot of nice value guys in the 6K range that we can load up. You can almost go somewhat balanced. And at the quarterback spot, I have somebody that I'm feeling like I really like that's relatively cheap, which I think will be a lot different than the rest of the industry when you're talking about, Jackson Arnold, Dylan Gabriel, Jalen Milroe, who I think are going to be relatively popular in some form or fashion. So we're going to be able to fit Ollie Gordon, and my hope is that he dips back under 50% as people just feel like, you know what, he's too expensive. The volume wasn't there. This Tulsa team, defensively, they hold up all right, but we're talking about Ollie Gordon, and if his YPC is going to continue to drag, it's currently 3.5 right now, which isn't great. It was 2.9 last game, which is real bad. But we're still going to see that Mo Ibrahim, Minnesota type of workload from him. And I think you see him get closer to 30 touches once again, which if that's 5 targets and 25 carries, cool. If it's 20 carries and he gets a bunch of targets, cool. However that ends up, I'm predicting 30 touches for my man Ollie. So he is a pay up option that I'm going to be heavily on. I really don't care if he had a bad game. Great spot to go back to him. When it comes to quarterback, Alan Bowman's too priced up for me at 8.3. Last year he was priced at 6K, 6.5, and we weren't really using him there. So to use him above 8K, I think you're just going to see him putting up that 20 to 25 fantasy points, which is just fine. But at that price, I think we can do a little bit better. He threw 48 times last week, but because he has no rushing upside, this is a perfect example, kind of the Shane Buechele disease. You can have guys throwing for 404, but still not quite hitting those ceiling games. And he did only throw the 1 touchdown last week, which hurt him. But overall, it's Ollie Gordon or nothing for me. Brendan Presley remains to be relatively popular. He had another really strong game last week, 9 for 91 and a touchdown. He also rushed for a 3-yard touchdown, 7,100. He is clearly Bowman's number one. Deshaun Stribling still pretty cheap. Now, Stribling was the highest owned of the three, and he was the one that we were, kind of pushing on. And we thought, hey, people are going to be overlooking him. But by Saturday morning, that swung the other way, and he ended up being about 35% owned in most contests. Priced at 5.2 after a okay game, 4 for 38 at that price of 4.8. He's just fine. I'd still rather play him over Presley just for the savings because he could easily be the one that, has the big game this time. And then you have Rashad Owens there in the middle at 5.5. He tends to be a usable option, but he's better off when somebody gets hurt. Now, he's more of the guy this year, but still kind of a crowded receiver room, so he's not really the look for me. So really the takeaway here is I'm playing Ollie Gordon. Now, again, when we're going to be talking about Oklahoma State's in the future against teams that are better than Tulsa or have running backs that I care about more than Tulsa, we're going to be definitely targeting that running back. And there's going to be times where we might play Ollie Gordon and the running back on the other side, which I know is completely – the book says you shouldn't do that, but we're unconventional here, and it's going to work. And it has worked in several of their games. We just saw Jaquin Jackson for Arkansas completely detonate. And we mentioned briefly on the show, we all love Taylon Green. Because of that expected Taylon Green ownership, which went north of 50%, would be a good bit of leverage to get Jaquin Jackson. Of course, very few of us actually went to Jackson. A couple of our subs did, but I only ran the one lineup, so I didn't get him, and he had an absolute huge game, and that's not going to be an outlier. Your running backs here, again, Lloyd Avant and Anthony Watkins. Neither has looked particularly great. Avant had 25 total carries across their 2 games for 125. Anthony Watkins, 18 for 86, and he scored the 2 touchdowns. Watkins is going to be the one to pretty much get the first crack at it. 5.4. If he was a 4.5 option, sub 5K, I might consider it a little bit more because the matchup is so great. If you're running multiple lineups, I certainly don't hate the idea because it is a good DVP spot. But you have to keep in mind that I think they're going to have a lot of struggles in the passing game, even though the offense or the defense of Oklahoma State hasn't looked great. We just don't have a lot of confidence in Kirk Francis to have a very good game here, which is going to hurt his receivers to a degree. Camden Benjamin at 5.7 in some more reasonable matchups is going to be a very big play. I do like him a lot. He's had a absolute monster season last week in their game, which they lost to Arkansas State, 6 for 131 and a touchdown. Week before that, 565 and a touchdown. He's been over 20 fantasy points in each of those games. Again, a solid GPP look, but not a guy that we can be talking about for our main team. I do think Oklahoma State comes out here and smacks Tulsa in the mouth a little bit. And then I just think they run Ollie Gordon down their throat and try to get their defense out of there in one piece. So Ollie Gordon or death for me once again this week. And it's going to continue to be the case every single week until further notice. Are you back on Ollie Gordon as well, or are you going to be with some of the people that I think will probably lower his ownership this week?
Oh, no. Always Ollie Gordon. And I watched a good bit of that game. I was obviously heavily exposed to Ollie Gordon and also Taylor Green, and so that game was meaningful whenever everyone had the ball. And just watching Alan Bowman throw is a reminder of why Ollie Gordon should get 40 touches a game. It is Alan Bowman throwing is like the most disgusting thing. I don't know how he still has a job, but if I were Mike Gundy, I would give it to Ollie even more. You got to run your offense through that guy and not let Alan Bowman. It looks like every pass he throws, he's hoping for pass interference. Is the best way I can describe it.
Well, he's lucky that he has Brennan Presley, who's just like a jack of all trades, can do so much. But yeah, I felt like with the way Taylor Green got hot in that game, it made very little sense for them not to continue to give it to Ollie. And I know that Arkansas's defense planned for that, but I mean, they're lucky they got out of that game with a win for sure.
And I also think that, even if Tulsa's stacking the box, they're not going to be quite as effective in stopping Ollie the way that an SEC team would be.
No, definitely not. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have Alabama versus Wisconsin. Bama comes in as a 16-point favorite, total of 49. Big decision point, I think, for this slate is going to be Jalen Milroe versus Ollie Gordon because it might be tough to play both, although it's possible. Where are you at with this game?
Yeah, so I kind of look at the Jalen Milroe decision as like the more expensive Seth Hennigan decision, right? Like we have seen 2 very good games, maybe not relative to price, but just in general football, like very good games from Jalen Milroe. We haven't seen anything close to his ceiling, right? We haven't seen him do what he's able to do and capable of for 4 quarters with the other offense pushing him. Now, is Tyler Van Dyke the quarterback that's going to push him to do that in a 16-point spread? Maybe, or maybe we get the Texas versus Michigan game, and it's decided pretty early, and we get a good but not elite game out of the quarterback. The difference between Quinn Ewers and Jalen Milroe, of course, is that we get rushing touchdowns out of Jalen Milroe and we get rushing yards out of Jalen Milroe in a way we simply do not out of Quinn Ewers and a lot of other quarterbacks. So, yeah, you're right. It would be real tough to get both Jalen Milroe and Ollie into the same lineup. One thing we aim to do on this show is find you the sub 4K or slightly over 4K wide receivers that do make things like that possible. But when building more traditional or more conventional lineups, yeah, it is a decision-making point. And then it's also a question of whether we want to use Jalen Milroe versus one of the running backs in this game. I I love, and frankly, I loved what I saw from him last year in his limited work, but I love what I've seen from Jam Miller so far. I think that we get a good amount of volume from him. Maybe even like a 20 touch game from Jam Miller. And he's shown the explosiveness so far that at only 7K compared to the 10K you have to spend on Milrow, and combined with the fact that there will be a good amount of ownership on Milrow, uh, I think Jam Miller is a pretty interesting play in this spot too. He does share touches with Justice Haynes. And I think I called Jamal Haynes Justice Haynes like 15 times last show. I
There's too many Haynes, man. There's 3.
Yeah, and there's Haynes King, and you're like, well, come on, that's not fair. But I do confuse those guys. But we've seen good games out of both of them. Justice Haynes, I think is an interesting play too. Probably more of a like large field GPP only type play, just because I don't think we're going to see the same level of volume out of him. They seem to like to go to Jam Miller a little bit more in spots where they're leading, and Alabama is leading frequently. So that's kind of more where I'm leaning on that side. In the passing game, I'm all about Ryan Williams. He hit for us big on that first week against Western Kentucky. 2 catches, both for touchdowns and 139 yards, and then went 468 and a touchdown in limited work against South Florida. He seems to be seems to have some chemistry with Jalen Milrow very early, which is great to see out of a true freshman, and seems to be the top dog in the room with your guy from Washington, Jeremy Bernard, and Kobe Brentis, who's been around the program for a while now at Bama, and then Kendrick Law, who I thought was going to elevate from being a gadget guy to kind of a third fiddle slot receiver type, but still be on the field a lot. That role has really been Ryan Williams, and he's been getting an elevated amount of looks. And he's the 3rd cheapest receiver in the Bama receiver room. So I can't not like the price on Ryan Williams. Definitely in Milrow lineups, I would want to have him. Even outside of the Milrow lineups, I think he's at a low enough price. And I think there are still enough people that are scared off by, it's a difficult Wisconsin defense. This is a team with a 16-point spread advantage. They're going to be able to put up points. I'm not worried about that. I think that the ownership will not be as high as it should be on a $5,600 Ryan Williams. And I like him a lot in all phases on this slate, whether you use Milrow or not. On the Wisconsin side, I don't know that I'm really ever excited to use Tyler Van Dyke. I'm especially not excited to use him against Bama, and even further less excited to use him when he's only $100 cheaper than Seth Hennigan, and I could go to a Seth Hennigan in a matchup I do like. So probably not going to go there. Malusi is Malusi. Malusi is the kind of running back that, at least in my view, will beat up on lesser competition and will struggle to get 4 yards of carry against an SEC defense, especially one like Bama. We could see him a little bit involved in the pass game, but I don't see him doing a ton of damage there. More just short dump offs for 4 yards here and there and rack up the PPR points, but not break like a 60-yard touchdown run or anything. So probably not going there. Splitting enough with Tyree Walker, who may or may not be there, but even if he's not, it sounds like Yakimelli would get that work. It's not going to be a 30-plus touch game for Malusi the way that we would kind of need it to be at that price tag and in the matchup that it's in. Definitely have some interest in Will Pauling, even cheaper than Ryan Williams, and I do think that this is a scenario where game script does affect how we have to view this. And even if we don't like Tyler Van Dyke a whole heck of a lot, if they're going to be trailing multiple scores for a good amount of the second half in this one. Will Pauling racking up PPR points at 8 to 10 yards a catch instead of the 2 to 4 that Malusi's going to be getting him starts to be valuable at some point. That said, still probably not a candidate to break long touchdowns. Bryson Green is probably more of your candidate to do that. But I think Will Pauling probably is going to be more reliable and more steady. Would have preferred to see him in like the 4.4 to 4.6 range. 5,100 is a little bit steep for a possession receiver. But if we get enough possession out of him and we get him in the end zone, could be a play. It's not one I'm overly excited about, but it is of interest, in particular if you're going to be using a Milroe and Williams or a Milroe and Miller, or some combination of Bama players other than just naked Milroe. You want to bring something back. I think Will Pauling's an interesting piece to bring back.
Yeah, and I only have really two things to add. One, Ryan Williams is just like a complete star. Like the very first week when you did that night slate write up, and I had just made the comment like he's going to be the next Jalen Waddell, and he might even be like better than that. And he's just so incredibly gifted, and it's only a freshman. We get another 2 years of this. It's going to be amazing because he will definitely not be priced like this next year at any point. So enjoy it while we can.
He was $3K. He was min priced on that first slate.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
And then Tyler Van Dyke, I will admit there was a time when he looked pretty good at Miami a couple years ago, and I wanted the Seahawks when we were transitioning to needing a quarterback after Russell Wilson, that I felt like Tyler Van Dyke would be a pretty decent pick. I obviously no longer feel that way, and it's just, the only thing I can say is life comes at you extremely fast, and Tyler Van Dyke looks like a prime candidate to be selling insurance this time next year. Maybe he can pull off the unthinkable against Alabama, but I don't think so. All right, moving on to the next game here. LSU versus South Carolina. Total of 48.5. LSU 6.5 point favorites, but I got to tell you, I feel like the under is in play here, and I don't know that we can write off South Carolina. I know LSU's offense has been explosive, but one glaring weakness has been their inability to run the football. We saw it cost them the game against USC. And then they did beat up on Nicholls State last week, but when you dig into it a little further, Nussmeier threw for 300 yards and 6 touchdowns. They had nobody above 19 rushing yards. Caleb Jackson, Josh Williams, both rushed for 19 exactly. The running game's going to have to get going, and they have to face a South Carolina defense that held Kentucky, a Kentucky offense that you and I both like and think has potential, but they held them to a measly 6 points last week. That's going to be rough. We know LSU's passing game is extremely explosive, but South Carolina runs the football. They play good defense. They are a kind of a not a great team for DFS purposes, but they're going to be a very violent juggernaut-style team, and I think that this game's going to be relatively ugly. So I do like the under, and I am kind of shying away from really any pieces. Kieran Lacey obviously is a stud, but I just worry that because of their inability to run, they'll have really no success throwing the football either. That means I couldn't pay 9-1 for Nussmeier. He was really good against Nicholls State, but against USC, just kind of, okay out there. I don't know that I could really get behind using that price. Their running game is a no-fly zone right now. All of their guys aren't even that cheap to speculate on. Like the way they're playing, they need to be under 4K to really even consider. The one player who had any success against USC on the ground, John Emery, got hurt again, and he's out for this season. So it's really tough sledding there for LSU. And there's really no excuse for them not to have a running game, considering the history of their program. Lacey is expensive at 8.4. I like him, and GBP extraordinaire. He's going to get a ton of volume one way or another. Did score 3 touchdowns in that game against Nicholls, had the one against USC. The yardage hasn't quite been there. In that first half against USC, he was completely unstoppable. And then USC just seemed to take him away in the second half, and he did pretty much nothing. So again, this is a tough spot for me to pay up for any of the LSU guys. Liberty star CJ Daniels hasn't really gotten going. He did have 4 for 71 last week, but his price needs to start dropping down a lot further before we use him. There are injury designations for Chris Hilton and Chris Parker still. Mainly the primary guy you want to look at here is the tight end Mason Taylor. who is priced at 4.7 and is pretty safe for a 4-5 catch performance, 40 to 50 yards. Whether he scores a touchdown or not, we'll see. But he's definitely in play at that 4.7 price. And some of their more explosive weapons, like Xavier Thomas, is cheap, and Khalil Pimpleton, who is a absolute stud, but also dealing with an ankle injury from his past programs. Pimpton, I should say. They're not very good in this spot either. So I'm kind of scratching LSU off my list, and that could be a big-time mistake. Now, on the South Carolina side, I'm not looking at Lenora Sellers, who does have rushing upside. In fact, that's main part of his game is his ability to rush, which against Kentucky, I will say their defense did pretty good against getting to him and did sack him several times. And Sellers has a case of fumbleitis, and holding on to the ball is not his forte. But they do have Rocket Sanders, who's a absolute star. You guys all remember him from his Arkansas days. He's been getting really heavy volume. The game against Old Dominion, they had to gut out. His YPC was only 3.7, but he did have 25 touches there, rushed 24 times for 88 yards, which doesn't sound great, but he did score a touchdown there. He did have a reception. He's only priced at 4.9. And I do think he can have success here. We go back to the USC game. Woody Marks had a lot of success against LSU, both catching the ball and running down their throat, especially late in the second half when USC took control of that game. Have to like Rocket Sanders. He's definitely a premium candidate to run in our 4 running back lineups that we always talk about. And even if you don't, if you want to run 2 quarterbacks this week, I think Rocket Sanders is a really nice play. Interestingly enough, on Underdogs, he isn't getting drafted there really either. People kind of overlooking him. Obviously, you don't have to worry about pricing there, but I just thought that was interesting that people are kind of looking the other way. As far as the receivers go, Gage Larvadan has not been really playing at all. He was a max stud. Don't know what's going on there. Kind of just one of those horror stories of transferring up. Doesn't always work. Jared Brown, who transferred over from Coastal, technically their best option, but we don't like Lenora Sellers as a passer. Probably not going to like their receiving room. So it's really just Rocket Sanders here. His primary backups, Juju McDowell and Oscar Attaway, who transferred in from North Texas, they're not really getting enough looks to matter. It's basically them giving Rocket 20-plus touches and then Lenora Sellers rushing, 10-plus times as well. I do think it makes sense for them to run a lot to keep that LSU offense off the field as much as possible. But when it is on the field, I think their defense is going to take care of business. So I think South Carolina has a chance to not only win this game outright, but I think Rocket Sanders could actually obliterate his 4.9 price tag. These first 4 games have been pretty ugly. We're going to get into some better ones. Before we do, how are you feeling about the LSU side in this? Are you a little bit opposite there of me, or do you feel kind of worried as well?
Man, I watched pretty much all of that Kentucky South Carolina game. My daughter was taking a nap, and I had, actually got to watch most of the plays as opposed to watching it out of the corner of my eye. And that South Carolina defense is one of the more impressive things I've seen in a while. And you look at the stat line and look up at the end of the day, and Brock Vandagriff had 3 completions all game. 3. Like, not one drive, the whole game. It's ridiculous. And it's not like Kentucky was throwing the ball a whole heck of a lot, but they just couldn't stay on the field. There was so much pressure every single down. I mean, even when they did get a good run, it was like, oh, okay, well, only because they got a holding penalty and back them up 10 yards. And when you have that many holding penalties, it's indicative of the level of pressure that the defense is getting. And even with those holding penalties, they were still getting the quarterback a good amount. So I think that LSU is going to struggle in that same way. They're definitely going to struggle to run the ball, and they may have an explosive play here and there, but I don't think that they'll have a sustainable passing offense. And so I think that South Carolina is going to have even more success in this one. And I kind of am with you. I think, South Carolina outright is a pretty decent call. I wish that they could do a little bit more on offense. I wish that, we could trust Lenora Sellers a little bit more. I wish we would see Nick Harbor do something out there. A lot of talent there that hasn't recorded any stats yet, or even really been on the field. So I think that, there's a lot to like about the South Carolina team, just not from a DFS perspective outside of Rocket Sanders. Hopefully they're able to pound him 20 times and he gets in the end zone a couple times and pays off the price tag for you.
Yeah. And I don't know that LSU to be like a truly elite team, and especially if you're an electric offense, like you have to win game. Like even the Huskies last year, and I obviously I'm a homer, but their offense was really good, right? They had to gut out some wins where Penix didn't do that well, and they had to run the football and play some defense, and they were able to eke those wins out. And I don't know that LSU has that same type of makeout where if they get into a physical battle like this, they're going to be comfortable enough and have the personnel to pull it out. So, yeah, I'm a little bit heavier on South Carolina than I thought I'd be, at least betting wise. So we'll see. Maybe we'll probably eat our words there, but it just looks pretty bad for LSU. All right, moving on. Boston College versus Missouri. Total of 54. Missouri 16-point favorites. Our man Luther Burden has been banged up and not really playing the way that we thought he would be. The targets haven't quite been there. They did force him to run a little bit, and I shouldn't say force him, but they gave him some carries. He scored a touchdown that way. But it sounds like he's been throughout camp a little bit more banged up than they wanted to let on, and that's caused him to be more of a decoy than anything. And at $9K, that's going to be a tough price to pay, I think. We'll see what you say. And then on the Boston College side, we got our guy Castellanos, who is just, an absolute star and only priced at 7-8, but perhaps in a tough matchup. So where are we at with this one?
Yeah, it's an interesting game because I like both of these offensive sides individually. I don't particularly like any players within them in this matchup against each other. We don't know enough about what's going on with Burden yet to really have a good read on the Missouri receiver room. We haven't seen Missouri need to throw the ball a whole heck of a lot, although even despite them not needing to throw, they still managed to get Theo Weiss a 13-149 stat line last week, which is in a 38-0 game. You don't really expect a receiver to have 13 catches. And he's not even your number one receiver. And I checked to see if Theo Weiss went to Buffalo or something, and maybe they were trying to stick it to his old program. I don't think he did. So that one's kind of tough to explain. I'm not sure where that came from, where they weren't just kind of turn around and hand the ball off as you would expect when you're up by 5+ scores in the second half. So I think we are going to get a similar kind of game. I don't think that Boston College is going to be able to keep up in this one. I don't think that they faced Florida State, which at the time we were like, oh, wow, it's Florida State, right? But then, okay, 2 terrible games for Florida State. Maybe they're just not the Florida State that we're used to, right? I don't think it means that BC is that much better than we thought that they were. I think that they're going to get smacked pretty hard in this one. And I don't think that we're going to necessarily need to see a ceiling game out of Missouri in this one in terms of, Brady Cook throwing it 50 times. I think Theo Weiss catching it 13 times is also probably pretty unlikely. I think we will see a heavy dose of the running game. Now, that's where it gets interesting. Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel. Which way are we going to go on that? They have pretty even amount of touches. They have pretty even efficiency. We haven't seen a competitive game yet, so we don't really know who the true alpha would be if, they needed to decide, okay, we've only got one guy and we got this one drive left and it's a one score game and we need to milk the clock. We're going to give it to this guy. Well, we haven't had that situation yet. My gut kind of wants to go Nate Noel. He's the lower priced guy. He seems to be a little bit more explosive and a little bit more efficient. And I think that most folks will lean Carroll instead from this game. And I think that maybe not most, but more will lean Carroll than will lean Noel. And I think we have an opportunity to leverage that a little bit. And I was like, even if it's only a $400 savings, I like to get those savings when possible when choosing between similar talent, skill sets, and all that. So from that side, from the Missouri side, I'm probably not going to Brady Cook. Probably not in this spot, even though I would love to jump on a mega Luther Burden game where he goes for 8 202 like we know he's capable of. I can't do it in this spot. I don't think he's going to be necessary. And if he's still kind of coming back from an illness or whatever he's doing, I see this as like a, hey, let's ease him in and get him a little bit more work kind of game, but not a blow up spot. I think it's take your pick of running back, and I prefer Noel. On the other side, I almost never like Castellanos. I don't really like him in this spot. I would like him against like a Virginia, where anybody can do anything, right? But it's not really that going up against an SEC school, and SEC defense at home kind of seems like the game where Castellanos is going to end up with 2 fumbles lost and 7 sacks and 3 interceptions, and one of them was a pick 6, and we're going to go, why the heck did we play this guy? And so since I feel that way about him, probably not going to anyone in the receiver room. And Robichaud, I mean, he did well last week. I referenced that against Florida State, but I don't see a repeat of that either. Would like to see Daren Bradley like do something in his career. I was big fan of his at Texas Tech, but we haven't really seen him kind of sink in and load up, and haven't really seen the passing game in general do much. It's kind of just been Castellanos doing his rushing thing. Lewis Bond did have a pretty good game against Duquesne, 598 and 1 at 4,800, but much tougher matchup here, much tougher defense. I think I'm pretty much entirely staying away from the Boston College side and really only the running backs in the Mizzou side.
Yeah, this is one I am wanting to fade. It's really interesting because Nate Noel seems to be the more popular, at least on Underdogs. Like, he's getting drafted in the first and second round of like a 10-game set, and I kind of scratch my head about it. When you dig into their snaps played, like, he's definitely kind of dominated. The first game, 34 snaps, the second 53, and then you look at Marcus Carrero, 15 and 27. So Noel's getting more snaps, but then when you look into their carries, it's basically like a 7 to 11, 9 to 12 type of split each game, and they haven't necessarily ran the ball a lot yet, and this is a game where maybe they do, but I'm just, when I look at it, very easily it could be one of those Coastal Carolina situations, and I'm using that term a lot this year because how there's 4 options and Missouri doesn't quite have that many, but I just feel like it's going to be one of those things where if you take Carroll, yes, Noel scores twice. And shoot, that even happened at his last school, right, at Appy State. Or if you take Noel and Carroll scores. So I don't know. This is going to be one of those big spots, I think, where they're relatively popular. And the guys that I'm seeing draft him are at other places like ETR. So I'm thinking that Noel and early projections that I'm messing around with a friend of mine, he is projecting well. All of Missouri is. And I'm really feeling like I'm going to be underweight compared to the rest of the field. And it definitely worries me, but it's going to be one of those line in the sand spots where I'm fading Noel and hoping that he doesn't wake up with a 150-yard game and multiple touchdowns. And that
so is Carroll going like not too far after?
Not at all. No, he's not being drafted at all. So it's basically a 6-round draft, right? So there's
so it's in the way that the market is viewing him, Noel is like the dude, and he's gonna
exactly. Yeah, that's why I'm like scratching my head, like they've been so close. But like I said, when you look at the snaps, Noel's playing more snaps, but that just means he's blocking more, right? But it's just like still like there's other running backs that are going, like I would take before him, right? That are on that slate. Mario Anderson, which is on the Underdog slate, Jonah Coleman from my Huskies. Desmond Reed from Pitt, like he's been going number 1, number 2. Like there's just so many other backs that I would take before Noel. So I don't know if I'm just going to be way wrong about him this week. And it's very possible, it's happened before, but I'm just way low on him compared to what it looks like the industry setting up to be. And when I look at those prices and see 5-6, I know he's probably going to be very chalky. So we'll see. We'll get some aggregated ownership projections in the next 12 to 15 hours and see what happens. But yeah, man, that might be the play that kills me from fading. So we'll see. I hope not, but it's definitely going to be a nerve-wracking part of the slate, I think, for me personally. All right, moving on to a game that I am excited about. Tulane, the Green Wave. I see Brett in the chat there putting the wave emojis. Love it. Versus Oklahoma. Total of 46.5. Got to tell you, the over is in play here. I know Oklahoma-Houston wasn't a very good game, but watch out for Tulane. I'm excited about this team. Oklahoma 13-point favorite, so that tells us it should be relatively close, keeping it within 10 to 14 points. And I do think Tulane is live to not only cover, but maybe even pull out a win. The Kansas State game, they got robbed. There were some poor penalty calls there, especially at the end when they should have been able to send it to overtime and it got wiped away. I do think they'll ultimately lose this game, but I think it's going to surprise people with how competitive they actually are. We saw the Oklahoma offense completely detonate in week 1. They were very porous against Houston. Houston has been, the first couple of games, Houston's kind of like, I don't know, kryptonite to DFS this year. We like Donovan Smith coming into the season, but the Houston games have been just really ugly. So I don't know what the deal is there. But Jackson Arnold, the 174 yards, 2 touchdowns, threw 32 times in that game against Houston. They ended up eking out a 16-12 win. Similar to LSU, the running game for Oklahoma really hasn't gotten going. Now, they used like 6 backs in their blowout win the week 1. So that is kind of the reason why nobody really ascended in the running game. But then in a closer game, they gave Joe Barnes 12 carries. He churned out 40 yards. Taylor Tatum, who's really an exciting young prospect, he only had 1 carry. And the back that most people liked coming into it, Gavin Sawchuk, had just 4 carries. He did get dinged up a bit, but nothing that tells me he shouldn't have got more. He just hasn't been effective in that first game. He was real poor. Almost had a fumble that they wiped away in that first game as well. Only 10 carries. He's priced at 6.7. He was super chalky in that first slate. You obviously can't use him. You have Barnes down there at 5.1. Kansas State running backs had a lot of success against this Tulane team. So you can consider Barnes, which if you told me, heading into the year, it's 2024 and we're going to be talking about using Joe Barnes as a DFS option, I would have laughed at you. But he's definitely in play. I don't know that I'm going to actually get there, but it wouldn't be surprising if he put up, 75 and even 2 touchdowns. I don't know that he has it in him to put up like 100 plus yards. We'll see. I really want them to give Tatum the shot. Taylor Tatum, the young kid, he's there at 3-1, maybe more of a GPP look, but you can definitely run on this Tulane team. As far as Jackson Arnold's price at 9.7, that's going to be a little bit tough for me. He does have rushing upside. We've seen him rush for 28 and 34 yards, so it's there. You really need him to score a touchdown on the ground to be worth it, though, in this price. We haven't really seen him have to throw a ton of yardage. He's been more efficient with multiple touchdowns, 6 touchdown passes in the first 2 games. Only 141 yards in that game against Temple, but he threw like all these short yardage stuff to Deion Burks, and they just didn't have to do any deep ball stuff. They do have the weapons to throw deep. They just haven't had to, and they're dealing with injuries galore. Jaleel Farouk, once again, a broken foot, so he's going to be out forever. It's kind of similar to last year. Nick Anderson is trending towards playing, so we'll see what happens there. They're calling it hopeful/probable, but to me, reading into the boards and stuff, it seems like he's a little bit more questionable than the team wants to let on. And they have a deep ball threat in Brennan Thompson who can do some stuff, but really, we're looking at Jake Roberts, short yardage guy, Bo Sharp, who did well for us on that first slate as a tight end, Bauer Sharp, sorry. And then, of course, you have Deion Burks, who is the PPR machine, priced at 8K. He's very expensive, but he's definitely a guy who can rack up a lot here and against this Tulane team and get peppered with targets. I like him for, a 12-plus target game because I do think Oklahoma's going to have to throw the football here. And why do I think that? Well, because the Tulane triple stack is going to do some damage. I've been putting some stuff in the Discord and kind of saying my memes that I do and my force talk that I was doing. But Daren Mena is only 6.1K, and this is going to be the value quarterback that you can either look at me like I'm crazy, and I usually am, or maybe follow me down this path. In his game against K-State, he did only put up 22 points, and then you're going to look at that and be like, whatever, that's just okay, I guess. But you got to remember, he's only 6'1", and if he gets to 20 to 22 fantasy points at this price, and those guys like Arnold at 9.7 and some of these other 8K guys put up similar numbers or 25, 26, you are gaining so much more over the field because you're saving 2K plus and you're only missing out on 3 to 4 total points in a perfect world. Now, he doesn't have much rushing upside, so we got to throw that out, but we don't need him to at 6'1". This kid has an amazing deep ball. His accuracy was on full display against K-State. I posted a couple of tweets or retweet stuff, and it showed. I watched the entire Tulane game, honestly, and I was like enamored with Mensah coming into it. I didn't think that he was going to actually win the job. I thought Ty Thompson would, the Oregon transfer, but Ty Thompson's more of a mobile guy, doesn't throw with much accuracy. Mensah's only a redshirt freshman. The NFL draft guys who usually come around to guys 2 years after us and say, you heard it here first, they're actually already talking about Mensah. That's how much hype this kid is already getting. 342 yards, 2 touchdowns against K-State, 19 of 29. Really falling in love with this play. Could get me in a lot of trouble, but I think he's going to get 30-plus pass attempts. The problem, obviously, Oklahoma's defense is opportunistic, and they've done very well in their first 2 games. But I do think Mensah is ultimately already better than Donovan Smith. Hot take, perhaps, and will be by the next year for sure, especially if he gets transferred out. A lot of LSU guys are talking about getting him because of the state. We're going to be talking about Mensah a lot, I think, as the year goes on. The running game is strong. Mekhi Hughes gets all of the volume. He was very low owned against K-State. What did he do? He put up a 30-point game. Pretty typical for him. 128 yards, touchdown. He also caught 5 balls for 37 yards. Expect him to get somewhere between 18 to 20 touches with targets, carries. I do think Oklahoma defensively will try to make the younger Mensah beat them with like he did against K-State and kind of stack it up against Hughes a little bit. So Hughes is more of a GPP look to me. And I'm really dangerously close to playing Mensah as a main team option. We have 2 guys in the passing game that we can look at. My man, Super Mario, who was owned by me and I think me last week at 0.9%. Now he's up to 6K, was 5.4 last week. I'm fine paying that 6K price because we have a lot of good receivers in that range. We're going to talk about Denzel Boston here in a little bit as well. 6 for 128 last week. He had 4 for 124 the week before that against the FCS team. Multi-targets. He's very, very favored in this offense. They also have Dante Fleming, who didn't do much in the first game, but in that second game there, he caught a 53-yard pass, and then he caught another 20-yard pass, and he was very favored there, enough to keep defenses honest so that Mario's not getting double and triple teamed. In single coverage, Mario is way too fast for most secondary players, and he should have a very good game here against this Oklahoma team. Once again, 12 targets leading the team, 9 catches, 254 yards. The touchdowns will come. So I love Mario Williams. If you're not comfortable with the Mensah play, totally understand that. But I think Mario is going to be a core play for us once again. He was last week, and I'm going right back to the well with him. Now, the other player we can look at here, you heard me say Tulane triple stack. Who would be the other player in that? Well, it'd have to be a tight end, Alex Bowman, who is only priced at 3.4, near min price. Not going to get a ton of volume, but he is a big target in the red zone for Mensah to throw to. And he did hit him for a couple of long passes in that K-State game. 3 of his 4 receptions have gone for touchdowns, extreme efficiency. We obviously can't continue to think that all of his catches are going to be touchdowns, but when they get into the red zone, he is very zeroed in on number 87. That is his guy there. And with the defensive attention spread out there, what Bauman was doing in that game, he kept getting behind the defense. He did have, I believe, 4 targets in that one. Mensah did miss him on a couple. But he does a really nice job in the middle of the field. Big, easy target there. So at 3.4, we only really need 2 or 3 of those receptions. He gets to 50 yards. Even if he doesn't score, he's paying off that 3.4 price tag in a similar fashion that Haas would have, even if he didn't score the touchdown. So love this Tulane team here. Not probably going to bet them because I do think Oklahoma ultimately wins and maybe, backdoor cover type of thing. But I think Tulane will be in it till the 4th quarter. I really do. And I think a lot of people are going to come around to this team as we get into conference play. So with that being said, I don't know if I'm quite going to pull the trigger there, but I am going to have extreme exposure to Mario Williams, Bauman, and Mensah in some form or fashion if I end up going in my main lineup there. I don't want to have a case of like Caleb Johnson where I kind of wavered a little bit. I didn't go 100%, and then I was kicking myself and really did my tilting thing that I do. Just got to trust my gut on this one and go with Tulane here. So that's the line in the sand. Hopefully we've been really good. You had the Ty Felton call. We've had Caleb Johnson. We've been going, with these low owned calls. Bauer Sharp a couple of weeks ago did well for us. Ryan Williams was low owned. So I'm hoping we continue our streak of hitting on these low owned plays. And I'm presenting Daren Mena as the next sneak brand play for week 3. Might work out, might not. But at the end of the day, at least I'm going to stick to my guns on this one. And I feel very excited about this game. We'll be watching it for sure. nothing should shock you anymore when it comes to plays that I talk about. But where's your head at with this one, man? What do you think? Is Tulane just a crazy take there? And it's like, last week was an outlier, or what do you think?
So first read is this total seems like 10 points too low. Like if we like both of these offenses, a 46.5 total seems, I don't know, like I was not playing in this game. There's no SEC defense involved in this game.
Right.
What's going on? Why is this a below 50 total? It doesn't make sense to me. And so, yeah, I think the Tulane offense isn't getting the respect that it deserves. I think that, we've seen Oklahoma beat up on some bad teams, and maybe their defense is getting too much respect. And the combination of those two things, I think I want, Tulane plus 13, and I want the over, like kind of by a lot in both of those cases. So yeah, I don't think Tulane's a crazy play by any means. I think you're getting good value, certainly with Mensa, with some of the receivers as well. I'm not as much of a Mekhi Hughes in games where they're chasing multiple touchdowns guy as you are, but nailed Mekhi Hughes last week, and we've done very well with him in the past. So hard to have like a full disagreement on that one. So yeah, I like the Tulane call. I'm not as heavily on it as of now, but that could change between now and kickoff, because my read on this game is that Oklahoma's getting way too much respect in this one in terms of being able to bottle up this unpredictable and kind of new look Tulane offense.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, because we both felt kind of like the total in the Tennessee game was off. We ended up being wrong about that, which is going to happen. But typically when we both align on totals, we have those conversations in the Discord, like, hey, this doesn't seem right. What are we missing here? And this one, to me, right when I saw it, felt way too low. So I'm delighted to hear that, and I hope it does work out for us. All right, Nevada versus Minnesota. We're going there next. Total of 44. Minnesota 17.5-point favorites. Nevada, give them respect. They've actually done fairly decent with Brendan Lewis, and Minnesota now has their weapon, Darius Taylor, back, which the entire world seems to love going into this one. What's the plays here in this one?
Yeah, man, I love him too. It's a PJ Fleck running back at, what is he, 6'2"? How do you not like that? Like, what if Mo Ibra was 6'2" against Nevada, right? Like, how do you not get all in every part of that action? Rain game, terrible quarterback that turns back into a pumpkin. All like defense going to be taking advantage of that, creating short fields for Darius Taylor to run the ball in from the 30 like 3 times in a row. Yeah, man, I'm all over that, and I want zero other piece of this game. I don't think there's any argument that we can legitimately use Brandon Lewis. He's had extremely good, ceiling for him type games against SMU and against Georgia Southern, but I think that stops. I think this is a real defense, and it's in the rain, and they're just not going to be able to sustain drives. And on the other side of that, like, I actually do like Max Brosmer. I don't see him needing to air it out at all, or Minnesota choosing to do that. I would love to see him against like a Wake Forest and just see what he can do when he has to air it out. But I see them running it 30 times and, 27 of those going to Taylor, and just massive, 203 type game out of Taylor. So yeah, it's not at all a brand favorite, sub 4% owned type call, but I'm right there, and I don't really want anybody else.
Yeah, and I feel like last week when they beat up on Rhode Island 48-0, I felt like they gave him extra passing reps just to like kind of warm him up or get him ready, because the UNC game was pretty rough, right? And he didn't get a lot of passing attempts there. They were on defense a lot. So I felt like they took advantage of that and got him some reps. And coming into the season, he was a pretty hot, transfer, and a lot of people like talking about him and think he's going to do well. And I'm a little on the fence with it just because of this Minnesota offense, but I am encouraged to see that passing volume from last week. And I think you're right. There will be a time and a place where we can use Brosmer, but definitely not this week. And again, another play, the Darius Taylor at 6'2", like we're going to be able to litter our lineups with 6 to 6'5". And I think that'll allow us to get Ollie Gordon quite easily. So no arguments for me there. Darius Taylor, definitely the move. Nevada, no thanks. I do think they're better than people thought, but not trying to get too cute in a game like this. All right, moving on, we have a game between Oregon and Oregon State, former conference foes. And a lot of people this week, get the Apple Cup too, the Cougars in Washington. People talking about these rivalry games. They need to be at the end of the season or not play them at all. But this is just the landscape we live in now. Total of 50 points. Oregon is 16.5-point favorites. Oregon State, I'll give them respect. They've looked better than I kind of thought they would. Now they've played, San Diego State, which I did think was going to be much better than they showed last week when they lost 21-0. And then of course an FCS opponent, which they won 38-15, but they've been really quite dominant in both. And they've done that without much from the quarterback position. They've just got Jam Griffin playing extremely well, kind of a career backup now getting his opportunity, and then Anthony Hankerson kind of operating in that 1B role. They've got a really nice thing going in the running game here, and the best way to try and beat Oregon is to keep the passing offense off the field. So we're going to see a heavy dose of both Griffin and Hankerson. That being said, Griffin's a little bit spendy at 6'3" when you consider the fact that we have Mario Anderson, who we both like a lot. Darius Taylor, we both like a lot. Desmond Reed, who we're going to get to. There's other guys in that range. I don't know that we would be able to find realistically Jam Griffin over those guys. But if you're running multiple lineups, it does make sense because the volume he is getting certainly makes him a worthy roster. 18 carries against SDSU, 20 the week before that. He scored 3 touchdowns, and he is getting some passing work there because, again, the quarterback play is a little bit spotty. They're going to be throwing a lot of short yardage stuff. So I do think Griffin and Hankerson are valuable and viable as GPP looks. Just don't know that it makes sense to get there in our main lineups. And because the passing game is really tough on this Beaver side, and it's been that way for a couple of years. Last year, I guess it was okay with, ironically enough, DJ. But I'm not looking to any of the passers here. So mainly just the running game of Oregon State, which is going to have to be really, really good to keep them off the field. When it comes to this Oregon team, though, they've been, kind of struggling a little bit, right? Idaho pressed them. They ended up winning 24-14. Really kind of an odd one there. And then the game against Boise State, where they knew coming into it, Ashton Genty, like, this guy's going to get the ball. He's going to catch passes. He's going to run the football. We've got all the money in the world from Uncle Phil. We've paid for all these, defenders, offenses. So we got a team, NIL, transfer portal. We should be able to stop him. They could not stop him. And I don't think Oregon State has anyone quite to the level of Ashton Genty, clearly. But I have to look at this Oregon team and not really be as fearful of them as maybe we were last year when it came to their defensive unit. Still pretty solid offensively, but DFS-wise, not nearly as good as it was last year, at least yet. Bo Nix gives this team a little bit of a different element because he has that rushing upside, right? But with Dylan Gabriel, in his freshman and sophomore year, he was a little bit more mobile. His mobility kind of been zapped away as he had some injuries, and he's just much more comfortable as a pocket passer guy. And you're going to see heavy volume from him typically through 49 passes in that game against Idaho because, they were on the ropes for a minute. Against Boise State, he ended up only throwing 21 times, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. They had a little bit more success running the football. But Gabriel's priced at 9.9. I definitely think he's a quarterback people will look to because name value. You've got Jalen Milroe up there too. Maybe people want to be a little bit different or get some Oregon stacks. So I think Gabriel's going to end up seeing somewhere between the 18 to 20% ownership, but I'm just really not that interested in paying up at quarterback there with him. I'd rather play Milroe for the reasons that you explained earlier. So a little bit different there than maybe would be last year at this time, talking about Bo Nix. And then kind of a similar situation with the Missouri running backs. Jordan James is the running back 1, and he had 15 carries in week 1, 17 in week 2. He's getting passes. He's certainly not Bucky Irving, but the talent is there. He's way too expensive for me at 8.2. I couldn't possibly play him. And the fact of the matter is Noah Whittington exists and is going to be a vulture. Now, he hasn't scored any touchdowns yet, but you just know the minute you pay up for James in a game like this, Whittington's going to come behind and in the red zone, steal a touchdown. 14 carries in week 1, 4 receptions, and it's only the 6 carries against Boise State there last week. He did have a fumble. They recovered it, but after that fumble, he did get sat down for a little bit, but still exists. Circling back to those underdog drafts, James is getting drafted in the first round, the first 3 picks. And once again, he's clearly behind Desmond Reed to me, Mario Anderson, Jonah Coleman, like all these other running backs that are on that particular underdog slate. So I don't know, maybe people are just believe that he's going to get 20 plus carries and he's the guy. But to me, Whittington is there as a vulture. And I think that this is the game that we see Gabriel throw 40 times. So the Oregon running back's really not in play for me anywhere, to be honest. I might even look at some of the unders, but I think the total on James, when I looked at it, wasn't high enough for me to hit the under. As far as the receivers go, Tez Johnson's pretty spendy at 8.5. Only 3 receptions. They did a really nice job, -1 yards. When did you ever think 3 receptions for Tez Johnson after the year he had last year for -1 yard? Never seen that. 12 receptions in week 1, only 81 yards. So that's very kind of scary as well, because typically 12 receptions for Tez Johnson would mean 150 yards. A lot of short yardage stuff for him, screen passes, things that aren't working. It was Evan Stewart who had the big game last week, and he's priced at 6.8, a little bit more affordable. And if you have to have somebody from Oregon, I think he would be the one that we'd want to use. Yes, it feels a little bit like a chase, but I think that discount from Tez Johnson just makes too much sense. And ultimately, I think they'll end the year with pretty similar numbers. So that's one of those situations where you talked about earlier. I'd rather just take the discount between the two. But neither is like a priority for me by any means. You also have Treshawn Holden, who had a really nice game, 478 and 1. He's a little bit spendy, but he's going to be taking targets. Terrence Ferguson as the tight end. He's still cheap at 4.8. We can look to him as one of those classic 5 reception, 50-yard lines. Definitely a value that we can look at. Gary Bryant's doubtful for this one. I don't think we'll see him yet. He's still a couple of games away. And then, of course, you have Herbert, little brother Herbert, Patrick Herbert, still milling around there at near min price. Not a really a play by any means, but somebody who can take targets away. So still a crowded receiver room, but you can take solace in the fact that Dillon Gabriel will likely have to throw 40 plus times in this game. And I think that Oregon State's strategy will be to just milk the clock as much as they can, try to get a touchdown or two, and then just keep Oregon off the field as much as possible and get the pressure on Dillon Gabriel. So believe it or not, this is not a game that I would want that much exposure to. And last year, I know every Oregon game, it was like we have to have something from it, but I just don't feel inclined yet. And yes, it's very early in the season. It's only been 2 games, but I just don't think that Dillon Gabriel is comparable to Bo Nix in the same way. Gabriel, a better passer, but Nick's a better fantasy asset because of his ability to run and do some other things. So a little bit worrisome for me, and the prices are just way too high on both sides, honestly. So more of a GPP look, if anything, just not going to be going in this route, which may be another spot where I'm different from the rest of the industry. Dillon Gabriel for you, yay or nay?
I don't think so. It's the old he is a guy I would prefer to pair with someone, and his pairing options are too expensive, like you said. So the whole and there's not like somebody I'm dying to bring it back with on the other side. So the whole construction for me is just kind of it turns me off.
But yeah, definitely. All right, moving on to the next game here. Texas A&M versus Florida. Total of 48.5. Texas A&M 3.5-point favorites. A&M, had the tough loss there, and then they got to turn around and watch the team that beat them lose to NIU. Florida had a huge game from DJ Lagway, but Graham Mertz is back practicing, and the coaching staff is adamant that both will play. Womp womp. Don't know if that's going to be the right answer. If the job is on the line for Napier like it is, he may just need to hurt Graham Mertz's feelings. I don't know if he will, but this is kind of a weird one to look at here. Just a defensive battle in a game that Florida has to win, but Texas A&M also has to win. Probably a violent football game on the horizon here between these two. What do you think?
Can we get Tyrod Taylor's doctor in to help Graham Mertz not start this one? That would be really nice, because I would sure like to use DJ Lagway. And there's also a question mark on the A&M side. Connor Weigman is apparently questionable. I think that he will probably end up going, but in the off chance that he doesn't go, they're going to go with Marcel Reed at 4,500. So min price for quarterback. And that is something that we probably need to at least have kind of in the back of our mind, ready to pivot to, because Marcel Reed can run. 7 carries for 43 yards in mop-up duty against McNeese State. And so if Connor Weigman is truly questionable and then ends up being downgraded, in that Saturday morning flurry of information that we typically get, you want to know what to do with that tweet that says Connor Weigman is out. And yeah, you probably want to have some flexibility in that super flex spot to get to Marcel Reed at 4,500, because he would immediately become one of the best plays on the slate. Mobile quarterback at min price is something you want to do. If you can do it against a pretty bad defense like Florida, all the better. Unfortunately, we don't know any of that yet, because neither team wants to commit to a single quarterback, and that is not where you like to be on a Thursday night, but that's the way we have to have the conversation anyhow. You can have a little bit more certainty in the running back room. Lev Moss and Amari Daniels, it feels like a Noel Carroll situation. I don't think that it actually is. I think that Lev Moss is the dude, and Amari Daniels got a lot of carries against McNeese State because it was a blowout. 20 carries against Notre Dame, and not super efficient, 70 yards, and some work in the passing game for Lev Moss. And we also have seen Lev Moss for quite a while in this program. I think that is the more indicative way to view this situation. And so at 7-1, this is kind of the opposite of the Carroll Noel situation, in the sense that I'm not looking to take the discount. I'm looking to take the guy that I think is legitimately going to get the volume. And I do think that there is a true, number 1 and number 2, as opposed to a 1A, 1B situation with Lev Moss as a clear number 1 and Amari Daniels as a clear number 2. I don't think Amari Daniels is bad. I think he's very explosive. But I also think that he's not going to get anywhere near the volume that Lev Moss will get in this one. On the other side, because there is so much quarterback uncertainty, I do think we're going to see a healthy dose of Montrell Johnson. There is a little bit more clarity to the Florida running back room, at least so far this year, than there has been in years past. And if we get, 20 carries out of Montrell Johnson and 5 out of Trayon Webb, well, it's pretty clear who you want in that backfield. He's 6,100 as opposed to Lev Moss being 7,100, but Lev Moss gets to face Florida and Montrell Johnson gets to face A&M. So do you want the cheaper guy with the worst volume, or the more expensive guy with the better volume? Better efficiency. I think I'm going to probably lean Lev Moss, but I do see, the rationale for interest behind both running backs. I probably will not use both together, but I probably will have exposure to both overall. Another guy who may or may not go, Eugene Wilson, showed up with a lower body injury at practice on, I think, earlier in the week, but also today. And so if he doesn't go, whoever's throwing the football at quarterback has one less explosive option to throw to, and so we're probably not going to use them anyway, but should be noted, and should mean that for the mid-tier trio of Boardingham, DK, and Badger, all in the 4,600 to 4,700 range, elevated target shares abound. Hard to know who is going to, benefit the most from that, or if anyone benefits, because it could very well be Graham Mertz throwing the football to mainly Texas A&M defenders, or referees, or the sideline, as opposed to Florida receivers. And so it may not be a place you want to go. But if we get clarity that Lagway is going to be the starter and play the whole game, and we also get clarity that Eugene Wilson is out, I'm probably the most interested in Badger. I think there's the most talent and most opportunity for high volume with Elijah Badger. We've certainly seen games like that from him in the past at previous schools. As far as the A&M side, probably going to be a wait and see on the quarterback situation there. Not overly excited about any of the A&M receivers. Ja'Day Walker, we've used successfully in the past. We haven't really seen an A&M game that has been, we say that, and then Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois last week, and they were able to pass. So why shouldn't A&M have been able to pass, right? But I don't know that we have, a ceiling from any A&M receiver the way that we would have from like a Ryan Williams from Alabama in that same way. So not too terribly excited about any of the A&M receivers. Walker, Thomas, Allen, Muhammad, they're all kind of B- C+ type options to me. And unless I, for some reason, wanted to stack this game, or if we do get the news that Weigman is out and I want to pair Marcel Reed with one of those receivers, that would be, the reason to get there, but that's probably the only path in which I would get to using an A&M receiver. So all of that to say, I like the running backs a lot more than I like any other parts of this game. And please get us that news early enough that we can do something about it, with the quarterbacks on both sides.
Yeah, definitely. This is going to be an important one for sure. And hopefully, like you said, it's the first, lock we have that information. I did see Ja'Day Walker, who I like a lot, only played one snap against McNeese due to a precautionary hand injury. I don't know that we could do a lot with that, even if he was out. Like you said, I think whether it's Weigman or not, I think they're going to do a lot of running, and Weigman's a bit mobile. Coming into the season, there was a lot of Heisman talk for him. That's obviously dead now. But the passing game for A&M, I think, is going to be more of an afterthought for us more often than not. This is one of those situations. I took season-long unders on Eugene Wilson on PrizePicks, and coming into the year, I was like, yes, Wilson is great. People are acting like he's the best thing ever. But Elijah Badger, big-time receiver, he produced a ton of yardage and stats at a bad ASU program and a bad ASU, passing game. And we saw last week with Lagway, 3 catches for 123 yards. Granted, one of them went for 77, but that's what Badger can do. And he's only priced at 4.6. And I still, even this week, have not heard a lot of people talking about him, even with Wilson showing up as questionable 2 days ago on the injury report. Today, it sounds like he tried to practice, so we'll see what happens over the next 24 hours. But yeah, the Badger play at 4.6, like the MME guys, that's a prime play there. I think is going to be under-owned, and it's kind of got me scratching my head because I don't really understand why. And Montrell Johnson is another one of those running backs in that 6K range that just kind of I lived there this week with those plays. So he's produced well even against Miami, and when they got just kind of outshined and outclassed, he still did really well because that volume is going to be there. So I'm in agreement. The running backs here, Montrell Johnson, especially for me, I like quite a bit in this one. All right, moving on to the Apple Cup, the first time in like 100 years that it's been played this early in the season, but it's fine. We'll take it. They signed a 4-year agreement, so this is going to continue to happen for the next couple of years at least. Washington comes into it as a 4.5-point favorite, total of 55.5. Now, both teams look extremely different from last year. And yes, weather is going to be gusty and rainy, but at this time of year in the Seattle area, that's just kind of how it is. The game will be played at the Seahawks field, so it's technically a home game for the Huskies, but Cougars fans will be traveling as they often do, and the trail of cheap beer behind them will surely be there to follow. If you're a Cougars fan, I don't feel sorry about that joke. The Cougars have a really interesting quarterback this year in John Mateer, who has shown himself to be a mobile quarterback to the extreme. In the 70-30 game against Portland State, he rushed for 55 yards and a touchdown, and it only took him 2 carries. Now, that might have seemed like an outlier because one of them was a 40-yarder in Portland State, but he proved without any shadow of a doubt that he is a mobile quarterback. The game against Texas Tech played out very differently than I thought it would, maybe even yourself. They did win 37-16. I thought the Red Raiders would be more competitive. They weren't, and I thought the Cougars would end up passing all over them. They didn't. Mateer rushed for almost 200 yards and a touchdown, 21 carries at that, and he only completed 9 of his 19 passes for 115 yards. He was just able to run all over that Tech team. Now, dealing with the Huskies defense, they're going to be a big-time upgrade over what he just saw against Tech. And I think Mateer is going to be forced to throw a lot more. And that does worry me because I think the Husky secondary is a little more susceptible. The defensive front of UW is healthy and very vicious. They'll be looking to tee off on him, especially if he tries to run. So I do think the path to success here for the Cougars will be to throw the football. At almost 9K, that might be a little bit tough. Now, he did complete 11 of 17 for almost 350 yards and 5 touchdowns against Portland State. Didn't have to do a lot. But again, that passing volume was low. He was just super efficient. So we'll see what we get out of him against an upper tier opponent defensively like this that's going to force him into a lot of passing. Great GPP play, sure, but I don't know that I could agree with paying almost 9K for him in a main lineup. And keep in mind, I am a Huskies homer, but even if I wasn't, I think I'd feel the same way there just because this Huskies defense is the truth. With that being said, the running back spot, I think it's interesting. We want to keep the name Wayshawn Parker kind of in our minds for the future. He's priced at 4-1, very young guy. Kind of blasted off against Portland State, and then he did get some volume there against Texas Tech, 69 yards on 11 carries, had a reception, scored a touchdown in back-to-back games. Not quite going to be a level where he's getting 20 carries plus because there are other guys in this backfield like Leo Palasi, who gets carries. Schlen Baker, he gets 5 to 6 touches. So it'll be kind of more spread out. But by the end of the year, I think Parker will have ascended and kind of become the guy. And I can see the merit to using him at 4-1 because he doesn't have to do a whole lot. But that's more of a overly cute play for GBPs when I think that 3 to 4 running backs that we need to use all live in that 6K range. Of course, we have Ollie as well. And we can't use 5 running backs as far as I know. At the receiver room for the Cougars, you have Kyle Williams, who's priced there at 7K. I like him better on FanDuel, where he's much cheaper. I've had a request in Discord just now to talk about FanDuel. I'll do that at the end. Definitely the number one option, but at 7K, just okay. I would much rather play Chris Hudson, who is priced only at 4.9. I think when it's all said and done, their target shares will be very similar, and that is just one of those spots where I may have to end up just paying down at receiver to a degree. Hudson is the guy that I would prefer there. But there's also a ton of receivers like my man Super Mario, who I already talked about. And then on the Husky side here, starting with the receiver room at 6'4", Denzel Boston, who last year I was very high on this kid. Obviously, the receiver room was crowded. It was going to be really tough for him to get touches, but he got to play behind a really elite group of receivers led by Roman Dunze. With all those guys off to the pros now, Jalen Polk, who we saw on the Patriots now, Jalen McMillan caught a touchdown for Tampa Bay last week. Like, our guys are doing things. Boston is going to be the WR1. Lots of questions this week from people about Giles Jackson. He's a little bit expensive at 6.9 on this DraftKings part. On FanDuel, where he's cheaper, I don't mind it. Very fast. They try to put him in a position to use his speed to make things happen. They'll give him carries. But when you're talking about just PPR looks here on DK, nice simple throws, we're going to be talking about Denzel Boston, who I think is going to be more like Rome than he is like a Jalen McMillan type. And I think you're going to see him have a game here where he gets targeted 10 plus times and delivers 100 and a touchdown at bare minimum. So at 6'4", he might feel a little spendy to others, and maybe the weather scares people off because I know that's something that some people do worry about, but not something you have to worry about in a home game for the Huskies. I can promise you that. They also have Jeremiah Hunter, who transferred over from Cal's, the WR1, priced at 5.9. 5 for 72 and a touchdown. He's definitely going to be in the mix as well. Don't mind him there, but for me, I'm just really zoned in on Denzel Boston. I think he's going to be the guy. Listen, I know he's going to be the guy. Jackson, more of the GBP look, and Hunter, if you need to save a little bit, I'm perfectly fine with taking that discount. In the running back room, you're paying up a little bit higher, but Jonah Coleman, the transfer from Arizona, followed Jed Fish over. He has been nothing short of amazing. Now, granted, they played, FCS squad, and then they played EMU. Kind of the MAC showed out last week, but Eastern Michigan didn't. And I will say There were struggles early in that game, but they were obviously outmatched talent-wise. Coleman has been just absolutely dominant on the ground thus far, 127 yards in the week 1, 104 yards in week 2. This is a game where he'll be requiring more touches. We saw him with just 11 carries last week in the semi-blowout, 16 the week before that. He is going to feature in the passing game as well, similar to what we saw at Dylan Johnson at times last year. Different offense, but he will be used in a similar fashion with the way that Jed Fish uses his guys. So Coleman's okay if you want to use him at 6'8". This is a very flush slate for running backs. There are at least 6 or 7 names that I feel very good about. And if you come to me on Saturday asking about it, I'm going to say, yes, those are very playable options. We just don't have spots to fit them all. I'm leaning towards more playing Boston, which is probably going to keep me from landing on Coleman in my main lineup, but both can produce here. I do worry that this game's going to be a little bit more on the lower scoring side. The 3 of the last 4 have been really high scoring from the Husky side of things, but that was with Penix. That was with a little bit more high-powered offense. Washington State, I think, defensively is probably better than advertised. The Huskies defense is going to be good. And this is one that may end up being a 24-21, a 21-17, 17-10, like a lower scoring game like that. So maybe last year we would look to stack something like this, but I don't think that'll be the right idea here. And for that matter, with Will Rogers, who is priced a little bit high at 9-2, the passing volume hasn't been there due to blowouts. We can expect a higher amount of passing in a closer game. But if Jonah Coleman is able to control things and their ground game is cooking, they won't be afraid to just hand it off time and time again. So that takes some of the shine off of Rodgers, where we could pay $9K for Penix in last year's offense and feel great about it. Not so much there with Rodgers. And no hate on Rodgers whatsoever, but Damon Williams, when he takes over next year, is going to be like an all-timer. I would just prefer him to take the job right now, but we're not there yet with him, so keep that name filed away. But yeah, Denzel Boston is the one that I'll be going for here. I'm curious to see if Mateer draws the ownership because of that rushing upside that he's shown, but situationally, this just doesn't feel like a game that we should be getting heavily involved in. Betting side, yes, but not so much for DFS. What's your read on some of the options here?
I'm reminiscent on Cam Ward being a part of this Apple Cup series. It was Cam Ward and Penix was such a battle.
Yeah.
And Mateer looks like he could be a guy that is part of this Apple Cup for quite a time. He's been really impressive so far. I don't know that I can get to him over some of the other quarterback options on this slate. Love the Boston call. Probably will be getting to that quite a bit myself. Don't know that I have a lot of other strong feelings towards any other pieces from this game.
All right, moving on, we go to West Virginia versus Pittsburgh. Now, this is, the highest total on the slate, right up there, a point higher than the Okie State Tulsa game, 63.5. West Virginia favored by 2. We got a nice bailout because Pittsburgh money line was one of my biggest bets of the week. Cincinnati was controlling that game from start to finish, but Pittsburgh eked it out. We'll take that win. Feel like a similar situation here. I'm going with that Pittsburgh money line again, and this is going to be definitely a high-scoring game. West Virginia, we saw them get beat up on a little bit by Penn State in week 1, and we've seen Pittsburgh has been involved in just like amazing games the first 2 weeks. What a turnaround from last year to this year to where we're looking at stacking Pittsburgh games probably for the foreseeable future. I know this is a game that a lot of people are going to be on. Who are the options that we're looking at?
Yeah. So, I mean, start with the obvious. Desmond Reed has had probably the best combination of week 1 and week 2 games of anybody in college football. I haven't done the full analysis, but 77 DraftKings points seems like a lot for a non-quarterback through 2 weeks of football. Even for a quarterback, it seems like a lot through 2 weeks of football. And unlike Ollie Gordon, he's not 10K. He's 6,400. So, yeah, kind of like with Darius Taylor, I'm going to play that guy. There are times where you're getting too cute and fading a 6,400 Desmond Reed that realistically, based on the production so far, I think I would be auto playing him until he was like 85. Yeah, I think we got to use Desmond Reed while he's still getting 25 touches a game.
It's kind of like, just to interrupt you, but you said Ollie Gordon 10K. Remember last year when Ollie Gordon started doing things like Desmond Reed's doing and he was priced similar? It's almost like we're repeating history here with a different player in a similar way.
Yeah, the difference is I think Ollie Gordon's a little bit physically bigger than Desmond Reed. And so I don't know that his body will sustain, 30 touch games for like an entire season. But we're only in week 3 and we're against a West Virginia defense that doesn't really know how to tackle. So I'm not too worried about it this week. That said, there's other pieces of the game that I really like too. I really like both quarterbacks. Because West Virginia is so bad on defense, we're going to need to see a ceiling game from Garrett Green. I've talked a lot of times about quarterbacks who I don't feel we'll need to see a ceiling game from, like a Brady Cook, for example. I do think we'll need to see the best Garrett Green has got. And the nice thing about Garrett Green is that it involves rushing the ball. I was surprised that I got this game because you've been kind of a Garrett Green guy for the last couple of years, and you'd like to talk about him. But I'm very much in on 7,800 Garrett Green. Also, is probably one of the guys who would be taking me off 8K Seth Hennigan, just because I think this game, the environment is just like it's perfect, and we saw, yes, WVU's defense was terrible, but Brennan Sorsby looked like God out there against Pitt's defense. So I don't think anyone's going to play any kind of defense in this one. It seems like one of those wide open games where, yes, it's a 64 total now, but like this could also be like a 45-42 game, and that 60 whatever total seems way too low at the end of this one. Long, quick scores equal lots of points, and I think that's what we're going to have in this one is explosiveness. Running game for West Virginia, it's probably Donaldson. I think like it's interesting because we got that more of a 1A 1B scenario with him and Jaheim White, and Donaldson also can get involved in the passing game at times. Haven't seen him do that a whole lot this year. You would have thought that you would have seen that against Penn State, but didn't really materialize. And we've seen a weird version of this West Virginia offense so far because they faced a good defense against Penn State and a horrible defense against Albany where they didn't have to really do anything. But Donaldson did get to impose his will a bit, 14 carries for 125 yards and a touchdown against Albany, and similar volume, but far more bottled up against Penn State. And he's only 5,300. So we've got Taylor at 62 and Reed at 64, and Donaldson at 53. And now I'm like, well, yeah, if there's those 3 guys, how do I not use 4 running backs and use Ollie, but I also have multiple quarterbacks that I like. So a lot of decisions to be made. I could very much see using both Reed and Donaldson, unless you're going to tell me that, White is the alpha for some reason. So it is a little bit more conflicted. There's not like a bell cow in that one, but I do like Donaldson if, we think he's at least the 1A, if not like the true number 1 in that backfield. Receiver wise, I guess I should talk about Holstein too. Yes, I like Holstein, and he's a little bit cheaper than Green. I think you kind of have to use both quarterbacks from this game. I don't want to decide between either of them. Probably would prefer Green if I had to pick, but I think if you're going to use either quarterback from this game, you say this game's going to blow up and you use both and you try to get as many pieces from this game as possible. Receiver rooms. Starting on the Pitt side, it was kind of convoluted against Kent State in week 1 because it was so spread out and everybody did so well. It was kind of hard to tell, who they really wanted to focus on. Week 2, not that way. Canadian Bumfield, man. 123-2, and Holstein just kind of seemed to be looking to him the entire game. I was on Raphael Williams after a pretty big week 1 and a pretty low price tag in week 2, and they didn't look to him at all when he was on the field, and he wasn't on the field a ton. Kenny Johnson similarly had some targets, had some opportunities, didn't really make anything of it. And then Sincere Lee didn't come anywhere close to repeating the same kind of volume because there was no garbage time. Kevin Bartholomew was somewhat involved, but again, not to the degree that he was in week 1. It kind of all coalesced around Mumpfield. And I think that's going to be like in competitive games, that's going to be more what the story is. And he's on the field for like every play, and he's Holstein's first look for most plays. So if it's not Desmond Reed and it's a downfield pass, and he does tend to catch the ball pretty far downfield, as evidenced by 24.6 yards per catch against Cincy last week. I think we got to take a pretty strong look at that 6K range once again, Mumpfield being one of the top receivers on the slate, given the frequency with which they want to have him involved in the passing game, as well as the efficiency with him traditionally catching deeper targets and being a look when they get down towards the goal line, and not being 8K. It's just, and going up against like probably one of the worst defenses on this slate. It's hard to get away from him. So like him a lot. Don't like the other Pitt guys quite as much as I did last week. I think we got a little bit overzealous with that and took a little bit too much out of the Kent State that like, hey, everybody's just going to have a great game. Don't mind going back to Raphael Williams at 4,600 if we need to. I don't know that we necessarily are going to need to. I think there's enough running back value that we don't need to necessarily dive that deep at receiver this week, but we'll see. There is a guy on the West Virginia side that is even lower than that at 4,200, Traylon Ray, that I'm extremely interested in. He has been not a high volume target, kind of a mid volume target so far for West Virginia. But again, we haven't really seen them play a back and forth game yet where their explosiveness can be kind of shined. Have seen Hudson Clement be successful in getting the end zone at 4,800. It's not a terrible play. Preston Fox, kind of a possession receiver. At 4,500, not exciting, but reasonable. But Traylon Ray at 42 is probably where I'm going to go the most. And that Cole Taylor at 41 is also interesting. But again, not the same level of explosiveness to his game. So I think if I'm building kind of a game stack from this, obviously both quarterbacks, and then Reed and Donaldson and Mumpfield and Ray, and then I have like 2 extra spots to fill. So those are probably the pieces that I would be using if game stacking this game. You can mix and match the receivers on each side. I think the running backs are pretty clear, and obviously the quarterbacks are clear. So a little bit more look and feel at the receivers, but I really like Traylon Ray and I really like Mumpfield.
Yeah. The quarterbacks are fantastic. Green should certainly have a great game, as we saw Sorsby do. We know what Holstein's doing. Early in the season, it sounded like, or in the offseason, it sounded like Yarnell was going to be the guy, and clearly Holstein just took that gig. And going into this game, we mentioned the Cincinnati running backs going into the Pittsburgh game. Corey Kiner, what the hell happened to him in week 1? Well, he got right against Pittsburgh. He rushed for 150 yards on 20 carries. So there's no reason to think that Donaldson and White can't have big games here for them. The only thing that sucks is they are sharing, as you mentioned, and then Green has that rushing ability too. So some of that, those additional looks we'd see are just getting split amongst them. I will say Jaheim White is the most likely to hit a home run. An interesting stat that I had to pull. leading the nation in percentage of carries taken 10 plus yards. And he has that at 44% of his carries. Granted, he doesn't have like 50 carries, but 44% of his 44.4% technically of his carries are being taken for 10 plus yards. And I have a very strong suspicion he's going to hit a home run or two of 10 plus yards against this defense. So I think the best way there is to just kind of split, get exposure to both and do the MME thing. I do like Cole Taylor as the kind of a pair there because he's the tight end and Green kind of favors his tight end, but your Ray call is certainly good. And then as far as Pitt, I was proud of myself because I wasn't interested in Kenny Johnson going into that game. He ended up being like 22%, which was a lot for a 12 gamer. And you mentioned he got some targets, but clearly a bust. But what happened is I was high to a degree, didn't end up playing him a lot, but the receiver I did like was Raphael Poppy Williams there. And he just, the lack of targets there was scary. That's worrisome for me. I do want to get him somewhere in a GBP because I do think he can do well here. But yeah, it looks like Mumfield's going to be the way that we want to go. So just to kind of piggyback and echo what you said there, but I did want to share that White stat there. I wouldn't, if there's a underdog prop for long rush, they sometimes have that. White is one that we'll want to look at. All right, last game on the slate, and then we'll get into some fun stuff and finish up here. Notre Dame versus Purdue, total of 47. Notre Dame 9.5 point favorites. I got to say, I'm really concerned for Purdue. Notre Dame coming off for lack of a better term, just a really embarrassing loss to a MAC team. The MAC showed up. Bowling Green had Penn State on the ropes as well, losing 16-14. The Notre Dame philosophy with this staff is to run the football, have a great defense. Defense kind of showed up, but the offense didn't. Missed a field goal, just complete comedy. Riley Leonard was not made for this offense. I think he made a big mistake going to Notre Dame. There's obviously luster and pedigree and everything else with the Notre Dame name, but his style of playing, it just didn't make sense for him to go there. And I think they're probably both realizing that now, both the program staff and Riley Leonard. So I'm not going to be looking to use him. On the same token, not going to use Hudson Card, who I know is your boy. Of course, I say that in jest. No real plays in this game except on the Notre Dame running back side, but the price of Jadarian Price is way too high, and he's not even really seemingly going to be the guy it's going to factor in. But Jeremiah Love is the one that we could theoretically use here. He's priced at 5.7. He gets some receiving work. He scored a touchdown in each of the first two games. The overall yardage is going to be lower, I think, because he does share carries with Price, and they are going to try to throw the football to a degree. But if anyone is going to be usable here, it is going to be Jeremiah Love at that 5.7 price point. Not really looking. You still want Chris Mitchell to be a thing. He was so good at FIU. He's priced at 5.7, but no. And on the Purdue side, because of the Hudson Card struggles that we have come to expect in this defense, I think Notre Dame is just going to tee off time and time again because this is going to be a really pissed off unit, right? The tight ends for Purdue performed well in their first game against Indiana State. Max Clary, 5 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. He's priced at only 3.4, but I want to see him against this defense before I really use him. I'd much rather use Bauman from Tulane at the same price. Running backs for Purdue, our guy Maccabee. He's a pass catcher. He's going to get double-digit touches. He's only priced at 4.4. There is merit even against a tough defense in using him. Will share carries now with Reggie Love, who came over from Illinois. But I'm, really trying to give some sort of sneak from this game. And there's just way too many other games that we've already talked about, 3 or 4, that are just way better spots. Betting wise, we can probably go hard on the Notre Dame 9.5. I think they're probably going to win by 2 touchdowns or more. If they don't, then this Notre Dame team is done, and they're going to be firing their coach sooner rather than later. But I do think taking them as a 9.5 point favorites there against Purdue is probably the right call. Before we get into props and everything else, do you want to add anything to that game before?
No, I think we're good there.
All right. So we're going to get into PrizePicks and Underdog. I'll cue you up there really quickly. I want to bring up FanDuel. Asked for a couple of the cheapies, and this will be something we can go into more in depth on Saturday morning. Tight ends on FanDuel are all really cheap. 5.6 for my guy Alex Bowman, who I've talked about at length. Mason Taylor for LSU at 6K. Cole Taylor for West Virginia, and Bauer Sharp at 5,700. Those are the cheapies off top, and I know Giles Jackson is there as well. I will go more in depth about the FanDuel pricing, and I'll have a handle on ownership Saturday morning. So for lack of time here tonight, I will kind of put that on ice, but I will get that answered for you on Saturday morning for sure. All right. PrizePicks and Underdog, and we can kind of combine them. We don't need to separate them. I want to start because, and by no means am I like, when you got the Ty Felton call, like you should certainly pat yourself on the back and stuff. And I'm not doing that with this play, but I'm a firm believer that this man is going to absolutely terrorize Troy. Iowa's playing Troy. The Troy rush defense, not so good. They have been absolutely dominated. They played Memphis last week. Memphis put 38 on them. Mario Anderson rushed for 125 yards on just 17 carries. Then you can go back and look at Nevada, a team that's kind of played pretty well. They played Troy. And Savion Red, who was a player that you had mentioned on your last write-up, he had rushed for 135 yards against Troy on just 11 carries. Now we have Caleb Johnson, who just looks like an absolute vicious juggernaut of a runner, playing a team that just gave up 130 plus yards to two different running backs on less than 20 carries. If anything's clear to me now is Caleb Johnson's going to get 20 plus touches no matter what, unless Iowa thinks Cade McNamara can win them games. He didn't against Iowa State there, an embarrassing loss for them. The rushing totals are comical. You have 79.5 rushing yards for him on PrizePick as the normal, 59.5 as the Goblin, and 89.5 as the Demon. He's going to rush for 120 plus yards. I have a prop bet for him as well, but that is just a laughable number. He's going to rush for a astronomical amount of rushing yards against this Troy team. So that's the one I wanted to start with. What do you got?
So let's start with the what was the what did you say the Demon was for Caleb Johnson?
It was, well, an hour ago it was 89.5.
Okay, yeah, no, it still is. I think I heard that wrong. Looking at other potential demons and adjustments, because I do like trying to mix in the demons and getting those outsized payoffs. So Darius Taylor, the regular number is 92.5. I think he easily gets over 100 against Nevada. The demon is at 109.5. I'm pretty comfortable there too. So I think that's one I would take the demon on. Staying with rushing yards, there's another one that I liked. Let me just make sure we're at the same number there. Nate Noel. It's interesting. They don't offer a prop for Marcus Carroll on PrizePicks anyway. I'll have to look on Underdog separately, but Nate Noel was at 64.5 for the regular, 74.5 for the demon. I think both of those are pretty comfortable numbers. Again, would trend toward the demon there. They don't offer a demon on Ollie. They don't let you bump Ollie's 116.5 up any further than that.
They're scary.
But 116.5 against Tulsa, it's ridiculous to say that feels comfortable, but that feels comfortable. Yeah. Mario Anderson, 62.5 regular, 74.5 demon. I would probably stick to the regular on that one just because I think he's going to get in the end zone, but I also think they're going to be throwing a decent amount there. And then Jam Miller, regular number at 66.5. I like that one quite a bit too. And then going back to like kind of my roots of the receptions total of, one that I've liked a lot. Treylon Ray over 2.5 receptions. Obviously, if I like him for DFS purposes, I'm expecting him to catch the ball 3 times. Not a lot of options in that particular stat, but that is one that stands out to me that I like quite a bit. And then let's see. It's good for me for right now. Why don't you throw some?
Yeah, so Eli Holstein, because I started out the season, I had to take my lumps, not thinking that he was going to set the world on fire, but he has. I'm going right to his demon play here. It's 299.5 passing yards. I think we're looking at a 300 plus game from him. Just the fact that Desmond Reed had 100 plus receiving yards, like that just gives him such a higher floor for his passing yardage. So taking the demon there. Daren Mena over 195.5 passing yards. Like I legitimately think he's throwing for 250 plus. So obliterating that. And then over on Underdog, I have 2 Mario Williams over 64.5 receiving yards. We hit that. That was one of our prop bets last week, 35.5 receiving yards, which we'll never get that again. But Mena's throwing for 250. Mario's probably getting 100. Elijah Badger over 43.5 receiving yards on Underdog. I don't think he's getting any respect, and he should be. And then Montrell Johnson over there on Underdog over 63.5 rushing yards. He's already shown he can rush for 75 plus against a good defense, and his volume, I think, probably carries him to a similar number. So those are the final ones for me.
I like it.
All right. Actually, I'll throw one more in there for the brand. Ty Felton. It's his receiving yards on Underdog. I forgot about this one. Are 78.5. Until I see otherwise, I'm just going to assume he's going to have 100 plus yards in every game. All right. Best bets. I have 2 from the featured free article that came out. One was FIU plus 5.5 versus FAU. That is now plus 5. So we're getting some CLV in a good direction. The other one was Southern Florida versus Southern Miss. It was minus 11.5. It's now minus 11. So that went the wrong way on me. FIU went the right way, but I'm so confident in South Florida to beat Southern Miss. I mean, after what I saw against Alabama and Byron Brown, I'm pretty confident in this team. And even going into that game, I felt pretty good about Byron Brown. So I think that's a safe number still. Tulane plus 13 versus Oklahoma. I did feature that. I'm back on the Pitt money line and then Virginia money line as well. I'll call Anthony Colindera is going to be one of my favorite quarterbacks this year. I can already tell I like this guy way too much. And then 2 props that I like. Actually, there's 3 props, I should say. Caleb Johnson, 120 plus rushing yards on DraftKings is plus 340. 100 plus is plus 165 and 110 is plus 235. I think I'm going right to the 120 there and getting those amazing odds. And then Malachi Fields, 100 plus receiving yards at plus 425. Nick Marsh, they're playing Maryland, by the way, Virginia is. Nick Marsh, who we kind of mentioned briefly for Michigan State a week or 2 back as kind of like a possible, because Alante Brown hurt, breakout candidate. I didn't think he would do this, so I won't pretend I did. But he got 8 catches for 194 yards and a touchdown against that Terps team. Then you go back to week 1 when the Terps beat up on UConn, and Skylar Bell, familiar name from Wisconsin, he went 5 for 141 in a really bad loss for UConn. Both similar players, alpha receivers, I guess you could say, with speed. Malachi Fields fits that mold. He's already broken 100 yards in each of his first 2 games. He absolutely just raged against Wake Forest. Didn't catch any touchdowns, but receiving-wise, another huge game. It seems very likely that he will have 100 plus yards against this Maryland team, especially with the way that they collapsed last week. So I'm very confident in that one. And then Daren Mena, the 275 plus passing yards is plus 700. I think I am going to have like a 3-leg with those 3 on it, but I'm safely going to feel about the 250 plus, which is plus 390. So 3 props that I feel really good about. Amazing odds, putting them together, and may have $100 bet there, which pays out almost 10 grand if it hits. I don't know if I'll be that lucky, but that is something that I think I'm going to have to do.
That Virginia Maryland game, that is going to be heavily featured on my night slate right up. That is a barn burner waiting to happen. I'm excited about that one.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that one will do us much better than the NC State game did.
Well, let's hope.
All right. So that takes us to the end here. One final segment, which will be Jake's Slate Breakers. The Ty Felton call was God tier, absolutely God tier. Loved it. Last week's didn't quite work out, but that's to be expected. There's going to be some, we're not going to get everything right between the 2 of us, but we try our best to be competitive. With that being said, I am excited to see the week 3 iteration that's going to move us to 2-1 in Jake's Slate Breakers. Who is that player and what is that stat line going to be?
All right, we're gonna go from the game that everybody's gonna be on, but with the piece that probably fewer people are gonna be on, which is gonna be Traylon Ray, who is gonna go for 6, 135, and 2.
6, 135, and 2. You have heard it here. It's going to be like 1% owned, similar to what we saw at Hawkins and Felton. Love it. Very excited. This is going to be a great week. We have had a pretty damn good season to start, which I've been saying it's going to be our best season ever. Very confident. Looking forward to this West Virginia game. Cheering on Traylon Ray. He already has that modifier from Jake's picks. Thanks, everybody who continues to support the show. We had 275 of you watching us late, 11 o'clock at night. We'll be back Saturday morning, 8 a.m. PST, 1 hour before lock. That's when you'll get all your questions answered. Any comments, concerns, we'll go over injury news as well as ownership aggregation and any last-minute stuff. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the continued support, and we'll see you next week on the Super Show.